I just want to quickly introduce my team. For those of you who've been here before, at our previous town halls, we have our consultants of special ed law and policy, Liz Truly. We have Emma Mendez. Kerry couldn't be with us today, but they are our UFT liaisons for the Division of Specialized Instruction and Student Support Services. And then we have Lisa Arian and Gary, who are going to be doing screen shares and watching the Q&A for us. And as Michael just said, Mary's here and Rich Mantell will be joining us as well. We do have health and safety folks here, Jeff and Jennifer. We're not going to actually have them present, but any specific questions you may have, we can either drop their information into the Q&A, or you can put a question there and Jennifer will do her best to see if she can answer those questions. We're here to make sure that we have your back and we are fighting for you, because we know that you have given so much and have been so steadfast in your dedication and commitment to the students, the most vulnerable students and their families. So, you know, we worked the best we can, Mary and I, over the summer, and getting timelines that were actually doable, we hope, you know, not the DOE's timelines. And as Michael said, we really want to I want to have more communication with you. So I have set up, you can always email me directly, of course, but for the purpose of recovery, we did set up a special ed recovery mailbox, which Lisa or Gary will drop in that for you. And please, please, please communicate with me. Let me know what is happening. Let me know what outcome you're looking for, how I can assist you. And while I can assist you to resolve, I will also say, if you have a scenario at your school where things seem to be going well, I'm sure Mary and I would love to do a visit there as well, because we do want to see, with all that's been put into this recovery effort for students, we'd like to see places where it's actually working well in addition. So real quick, I will go over the agenda. Mary will, and then I'll pass it over to Mary, who will really cover the overall academic recovery efforts, which again is for all students. A big battle to make sure that this wasn't a separate but equal system for special ed students on one track, general ed students on another. That was a 3-month battle to get people on that same page at the Department of Ed. And once Mary goes over that, I will go into the special ed recovery piece, and then we'll talk a little bit about IEP meetings, compensatory services, and then we'll wrap up with Debbie going over the operational process. So with that, Mary, I will pass it to you. And if you want, whenever you want, you could just tell Gary, he could bring up the link of the actual document, because it's on our website. Just a reminder to everybody, I sent an email on the 15th of September that actually had the links to these documents and in the email box, but you know, you can always access anything we're going to talk about on our website, and we'll show you how to do that. Mary?
So thanks, Mary Jo. And it's good to see so many names. I'm looking at some of the participant names of names we recognize and that we've worked with in the past. So I'm glad you're still here, and glad to see you're back in school this year, and we're all kind of getting together. So there's a lot going on with recovery. So first of all, someone wrote in the chat before that I saw that they're finding a hard time. How are we doing recovery and intervention and all of these things with a new curriculum in your school? If that applies to anyone here, I can't make promises that we know every single curriculum that the DOE is pulling out. But if you need support with new curriculums that you were given, I'm asking you to send me an email, and we will try to get one of our new interventionists that we have hired, and I'll explain that, over to your school to support you with that work. So those are schools that don't necessarily have a teacher center in them, but would still be looking for that same support. So we have 6 people on staff that are going to be working just with these intervention programs, and in addition to that, any new curriculum that's out there to give schools support. So if that applies to you, don't hesitate to email me. Again, can't promise that it's all of the curriculum that we've been trained in, and I'll let you know that if it's not, but that service is available to every school. So A little bit on the recovery program. By now, even though I'm seeing in the questions, not everyone has, but by now, everyone should have been trained in an intervention program. The intervention screening, I'm sorry, the screening that is happening. You should have all been trained in that, whether it was Acadience for your K-2 or for 3 through 10, you should have had some training in either NWEA MAP or iReady. And so that you can start those assessments in your school. The assessment period started on September 27th. So that period has opened. I know there are some schools that have completed it and some schools that, are still working on that kind of thing. Everyone should have an academic intervention team. So an academic intervention team might be a team that you've already had at your school and you called it something else. But the purpose of that team will be to look at what the results are and analyze them and see what types of supports your school needs. Either a tier 1, where that would be the school is looking for a bigger reteach, working with the teachers, figuring out deficits school-wide that you might need, or if it's a tier 2, more direct instruction to the students in a smaller scale, or then moving to tier 3, even smaller scale with real, true, embedded, research-based programs in order to help our students in order to see where their deficits are based on where they should be at this point. Remember that any assessment that is given should be following based on the screener. So this is not just, so this one we can't blame principals for. Based on the screener, there should be modifications based on IEP, but again, based on what that screening tool is, and some of the screening tools, it's embedded within there, and there's an understanding that students with disabilities still would be given these screeners, and there are accommodations that are made right within the screening tool itself. We want to keep it as true to the screening tool because at some point, this entire team here, along with the teacher center team, is going to be looking at what some of those screening tools, what some of those tools that came out of there and where we're going to go in terms of supporting schools and what they need. So we want to keep it as true to the actual test that's supposed to be given as possible. You should have been trained, again, as I said, in the screening tool, but at this point, you should be providing those screenings. And what we're finding, so let me throw out one of the problems just so that later on, no one says like, oh, wait, there's a problem and we didn't know. We're finding the only problems we're having right now is in K-2 with the Acadience, because if your schools are not using iPads, the Acadience is taking a very, very long time in order to give to students. And if that applies to you, you should be letting your chapter leader know immediately, because then we will be able to support that work. So if there is issues with getting the actual tools that you need to give the assessment, I have to give one little breath of fresh air to the Department of Education. They are getting those tools out to the schools immediately as soon as we report that. So it might not be exactly as many as we want. It might not look exactly as we want, but they are supporting the schools with that. So that's some of those pieces. In addition to that, if you have Ls, some of your Ls are going to be taking this. I just want you to understand that right now there is only a Spanish version of the screener in some sites where they have bilingual programs. Other languages may not be available to your Ls, which we already know is a problem. So just so that you know that it's already out there, it's already on the table. We knew going into that would be an issue. And there'll also be tools available for our Ls in tier 2 and tier 3 that can be bilingual. So we're working with those groups in order to make sure that they get those supports. I'm just trying to make sure, Mary Jo, I cover it in general without, because I know you're going to be going over the special ed piece. The AIS team, it's important that we have special education teachers on that AIS team. That's really important, because what often is going to happen, or what we know is going to happen, is the SIT team. There'll be special educators on, and then our AIS team won't. So if you're up to it, if you're willing, volunteer for these committees, because we need some special educators on those committees. in addition to the professional learning team. So I just want to back up and remind you about this professional learning team. The professional learning team is the PD committee and the ILT together, right? So we always need an acronym PLT. So it's the professional development and the ILT mixed together. One chapter leader gets to select half of that committee, and the principal gets to select the other half of the committee. That is vital for everything that Mary Jo is going to talk to you about today, because if we want to provide the most accurate and the most beneficial professional development for your school, we need to make sure that those professional learning committees are there. And then we're going to reach out to chapter leaders. And if you have a teacher center or a PLC or a UCS school, or if you're in any of the other title schools, we're going to work with those teams in order to try to figure out what can we provide for the school. So what can we give to you? Not that you guys have to come up on your own with what those professional developments are. We're going to provide that for you. So we want you to know that that's available for you out there. The other part that I want to throw out, I was in a school the other day that will remain nameless, but I told Mary Jo that I was kind of shocked. The teacher put up on the board in front of the class on the whiteboard, this test doesn't count. So yes, it's not going to count for the students in terms of their report card, in terms of their academic average on their permanent record. But you and I all know, and I think it's obvious, but I think teachers, in a hope to become calming children down, having them relaxed, saying it doesn't count, but that's going to skew our results, because what I watched happen in that class is the kids just started pushing the buttons on their computer. They were taking an iReady because they knew it wasn't going to count. So just be careful with how we're giving that information out. Again, think it's obvious, but I know sometimes in an effort to calm our students, we try to give them a little more information than maybe they should hear at that moment in time. The actual training that will begin very shortly will be on the programs that will help the students based on whatever data is analyzed. So we're going to try to work alongside Mary Jo and her team in order to make sure that we can provide as much support for our students and our teachers so that they know what programs are out there. If we need to get people trained in a variety and certified in order to give programs, we'll do that. It's just that we want to work along the school. Remember, the union can't force a curriculum into a building. All we can do is we can support the curriculum you have there. And I'm not going to even look at my friend Liz Truly, who will say she's not happy with a lot of the things that are in your schools, and I won't get her started with all of that, but we can support that and make that work. But many of those pieces we will have and will have going on. So I just see a few people in the questions are just telling us about all of the crazy curriculums that have had in your school. I want to also put out another, as in my other hat, of piece of doing contractual pieces. Under your school leadership team, you should have a voice in the curriculum that has been chosen for your school. So as you do this, this is a great opportunity as you're using these assessment tools to look at the curriculum for going forward when you speak to your school leadership team. And if you have something that doesn't meet your needs, I'm not looking at anyone, but if you have teachers college in your school and it's not really meeting the needs of your students, that school leadership team is vital to doing that. And if you need support in that work in order to make sure our students that may have deficits because they were completely remote last year, or they only attended school twice a week remotely, or whatever it might be, we are happy to come in and support that work and help you to advocate for the students in your school. That's our role as well. So not only to advocate for you, but we want to advocate for those children out there that may need additional supports. And I see the person that wrote to me from P69, I'm actually going to be coming to your school shortly because my goddaughter is working with you. So we'll make sure that we come to that school and support your new curriculum that you have in there. Anything, Mary Jo, that I missed?
No, Mary, that was perfect. Thank you. And so I'm gonna pick it up from there and go over the special ed recovery. I mean, as Mary already said, Students with an IEP will be part of the screener process. So that automatically means that if there's a need, they will be put into those intervention groups, which I'll go more into detail for the academic interventions. But Rhonda, if you could put up the PowerPoint, that would be great. I want to thank Mary and her Teacher Center staff who were kind enough to actually put this PowerPoint together for me. So I'm not going to read slides to you. That's not my style, but I definitely want to go over, the major highlights here. Okay. So the special education recovery entails really all the services that are on a student's IEP, right? Their program and instruction, but also if they have related services. So this is not to take away from the IEP. This is in addition to the IEP. It doesn't take the place of, it is in addition to, okay? And these services could be delivered after school or during Saturday, if that's what the school chooses to do. It will really depend on how the staffing and the students that want to participate, how that kind of works out at each individual school level. Again, the busing for students who are going to need busing, we've heard it's been a real nightmare this year. It's usually a nightmare, but it was really, really bad this year. So I just want to make it clear that for students who are going to participate, that the school needs to have that in their system 30 days ahead for the bus companies to be able to make sure they can get these students home after they participate in the special ed recovery. This is also not just something for the fall, it's going to go beyond, and we want people to know that those assessments, as Mary talked about, and looking at data is going to be something that's ongoing through time, okay? When we're looking at students, though, we really are looking back to when this pandemic started, okay, which was March 2020, so long ago at this point. And we really want to look at how students were doing, not only with IEP goals, as the Department of Ed first proposed to us, but also how are they progressing towards grade level standards, okay? Because sometimes when they're talking about IEP students, they just seem to make everything about IEP goals. And we really, in the spirit of least restrictive environment, as I said, we really want to make sure that our students with an IEP, that we're looking at the progress towards the grade level standards as well. Okay, you could go to the next slide, Rhonda. Thank you. Okay, so looking at these different intervention groups, okay? Again, in addition to the IEP and progress that's reported in Css on goals, we really push to look more holistically at students, okay? So that includes the screener data, as we said, report cards, projects, assessments, assignments, all of this stuff to get a real holistic picture of students and not just to go off of what somebody documented in Css. Okay, so if students, again, I just mentioned, are not reading benchmark standards, after these screeners, there will be targeted interventions. Mary, one thing that I know that we didn't review, or that you didn't review, was that as these interventions go through the different tier levels, the level of intensity of the group size, typically gets smaller. So I just wanted to point that out, which of course most of you know that have worked in any capacity with RTI or interventions for students. So the special ed office, actually looking through Css data, came up with priority categories, students that either missed a tremendous amount of service, there was either they didn't get a special ed teacher till, months into the school year, or they made no progress on their goals, or in fact could have regressed. So they did send data to the schools, as Mary mentioned, with the AIS team and the SIT team, that those teams will be reviewing that data in order to prioritize which students have the highest need based on looking at all this information together. But I want to be really clear, in order for recovery to constitute special ed recovery, these services and groups have to be delivered by a special ed teacher. Okay, I'm not going to get into right now how this is going to be documented as an individual recovery plan. I will get into that later, but we want to make sure that it's very specific as to what is put on that recovery plan with the amount of time that students are spending with special education teachers. So I want to say that some of the intervention programs are research-based and they have a group size maximum or even a time limit of how they deliver the intervention. So if students are in those groups, they may, depending on the intervention program, that may very well dictate, you know, the size of the group, which is usually no more than a group size of 5. And, you know, and those groups are definitely mixed with gen ed and special ed students. And this was something, again, we had to continuously really fight for, to make sure that the grouping is by functional level, and that these groups were to include students with disabilities as well, based on the academic, emotional, and functional level of students. Okay, so I wanted to just make sure that that's really clear. And we can always drop this PowerPoint in there for you and you can refer back to it, but I will also show you where you can find some of this information on our website. Okay, you can go to the next slide, please, Rhonda. So here's the priority groups that I spoke about. Okay, so this is a great slide. I thank the Teacher Center. Again, it makes it very clear, you know, when these services have to begin. And if you see under those dates, that there's a span or a range of what the weeks and the hours are. So that's based on the need of the students, as I just described. But in addition to that, what's not on this slide that I want to make sure that people are aware of is that it's not just about instruction. Again, if students have related services on their IEP, and it was determined that they did not make progress in certain goals around those areas, whether it's counseling or speech, OT, PT, or if there's insufficient data to really determine their level of progress, or maybe the parent didn't provide consent for teletherapy, for example, we want to make sure that that's included as well. And there are minimum hours attached to that as well. And I will show you where you can access a more full information on those specific timeframes for related services. So you could see as it goes through, the priority group 1 by November 15th and the priority 2 by December 13th, keeping in mind, again, that busing situation, that's not your responsibility, but your administrators. But just, you know, knowing how difficult busing has been, I just want to reiterate it again. In District 75, I think that's another piece, Mary, that, you know, we could mention that, you know, students that do participate in alternate assessment, they will continue with their typical screeners, such as the Sandy FAST. Okay, so I want to make that clear as well. So at this point, you know, I want people to really understand, although students or parents of students with disabilities choose to participate in special ed recovery, that by no means means that they are relinquishing any rights to, you know, due process, or, you know, and that a parent at any time can request for an IEP meeting. If they, like, for example, there may be situations where the regression is so clearly obvious. A student was verbal and then, you know, they've regressed so much that they're nonverbal. So, I mean, there's definitely specific situations where there would be a need, or a parent would make a request for an IEP meeting. But I would just want to, Rhonda, you could take this PowerPoint down for now. And I just want to pivot to Liz Truly, because I would like her to explain a little bit to folks how compensatory services ties in with this special ed recovery. And then we'll take a few questions.
Good afternoon, and thank you for taking time after your already very long and I'm sure exhausting day to participate in this town hall. Many of you have probably received questions from families about compensatory services. And the information that you've received from the DOE is all speaking to the subject of recovery services. So I'd just like to spend a couple moments talking about the distinctions and similarities between recovery services and compensatory services. Compensatory services are educational programs and services, specialized instruction and related services that are awarded or recommended to remedy a past denial of a free appropriate public education to a student with a disability. Prior to the pandemic, compensatory services were available almost exclusively through IDEA due process procedures. In other words, an impartial hearing, a mediation, or through the state complaint process. Now during the pandemic, the federal government and the state has made the decision that IEP teams can also recommend compensatory services. Now, in the context of the due process environment, compensatory services are measured in one of two ways. They're either an objective measure, 1-for-1 missed session, student has missed 10 sessions of speech, the compensatory service is 10 sessions of speech, or there's another measure which basically looks at what is needed in order to put the child in the place they would have been had they received the services that were on their IEP. Now, this method of calculating service is a little more complicated to determine because you have to look at the student's learning rate. You have to look at their progress, not just toward their IEP goals, but in the curriculum. A much more complicated measure, but in the end, much more appropriate for the circumstances that we're in, which is a very prolonged time of disruptions in their education. So after the pandemic hit, the federal authorities said that IEP teams should meet and determine whether and to what extent a student required compensatory services. School districts across the country balked at this because in making a recommendation for compensatory services, that implied, or it came with a determination that the school district had failed to provide a free, appropriate public education. And school districts felt that they had done everything within their control to provide services to the student, and they should not be held accountable for the FAPE decision. So many of them turned to calling the type of supports or services they were providing the services, COVID recovery services, COVID remediation services, anything other than compensatory services, which carried an aspect of blame or accountability with it that school districts felt was not appropriate. Now, New York City was not different in that. They were very not interested at all in approaching the topic of compensatory services through the word compensatory services because of the legal implications. So they came up with the recovery program, special ed recovery program. The federal government, in guidance that's posted on our website, recently addressed this issue. So what if a school district calls something recovery services? Does it count as compensatory services? And if you want to look at their exact response, it's on our website in the September 30th, 2021 federal guidance, question D9. And what they said was, it depends on how these terms are defined, determined, and implemented by the school district. So the questions that they looked at is, are the services delivered to all students as part of an overall recovery program, or are they individually determined? Now, in the context of New York City, recovery services, special ed recovery students are available to every family of a student with a disability. So we kind of look at, okay, they're available to everybody, but then the determination about what services a student receives is individualized. So there's a conversation that occurs with the family. The teacher, the case manager is looking at a variety of data regarding the student's progress on annual goals, on screeners, on what they're seeing in the classroom so far this year. And so there is a level of individualized determination. The second thing that the feds look at is the process used to determine the services an IDEA process? Well, we're not having IEP meetings and we're not filling out amendment documents. So there's some question there. But again, looking at the texture of what's going on, it feels much like what we're doing is kind of like an IEP amendment. So we may pass muster with that. And then lastly, what services are being offered? The services that are being offered by New York City are identical to the services that would be offered as compensatory services. They're specialized instruction and related services. So with the caveat that parents do not forego any of their rights under IDEA in accepting recovery services, New York City's goal really is to provide everything that a parent might feel that their child needs through the recovery services program. So at the end of the day, if a family comes to you and requests an IEP meeting, as they are all entitled to do, to address the subject of compensatory services, one of the first questions you'll be addressing is, what have we missed in terms of the recovery services for your child? What have we missed? And school districts are being provided adequate funds and the ability to get additional funds if they need it to provide robust recovery services for their students. And in the event that, for example, the speech provider, there's just not enough time in the after-school program or the Saturday program, the DOE will make arrangements for the child to receive services outside of the recovery program, again, through the recovery program. So those are some of the things that you'll be thinking about and addressing, but this is the framework, I think, that the DOE wants you to think about recovery services. And yes, it is asking a lot of you because these recovery services are going to be delivered outside of the school day. So that means people are going to have to stay after school, contribute, do Saturday programs. Again, it's a lot of work, but our students have been most needy students and they've been out of services for this length of time. They do need our support.
Thank you, Liz. And I think, an important point that I might have failed to make earlier is that, because of this situation in a pandemic, a temporary loss of progress or regression in and of itself doesn't constitute that the student's needs actually change, which is why we fought so hard with the DOE to push back on their timelines, because we really wanted to be able, you to get to know your students, for you to acclimate being back in the building if you weren't in person last year, for the students to be able to be back in the building and really get to know each other, to see our students when they're back in person, which we know they do better in person 5 days a week, but are they going to make some progress there before we just say every IEP has to be changed, due to a loss, a learning loss. So, and also I think Liz touched on it as well, as far as the services that are being provided, instruction and related services. I want to make it clear, if I didn't say it before, it doesn't have to exactly match the IEP. So if a student has OT and they missed a lot of OT sessions and they want to participate after school and get OT, then it's on the mandate of the IEP as a mandate of a group of 2. It's okay if they're in a group of 3 or 4, because this is, again, it's recovery and it's not compensatory. So I just wanted to be really clear about that. And I want to pause here and see if Emma or anyone else on the team has anything to add. Occasionally I might miss a nuance or something, and I just want to give that opportunity. Emma, if you have anything to add, and then we can take a few questions.
Thank you, Mary Jo. No, I think everyone's done a really thorough job, but thank you.
Great. So Lisa and Brad, if there are some questions related to these topics that we just discussed, we could take a few questions now.
So Mary Jo, it's Lisa. Could you address what the DOE is doing regarding lack of paras before the COVID issue and now during it? And can a principal assign a one-to-one para to a second student?
We know that this the vacancies for paras and the nomination process has been, they seem to wait traditionally every year for the pool to deplete before they actually replenish it. I've been in schools all this week, and I'm sure Emma has heard the same thing as well, that principals have nominated X amount of paras, and it's like something is nothing is moving. So I can assure people that Michael and myself, we are aware that this is a problem that is just now compounded with this whole shortage of paras who may have not been vaccinated, and it is being addressed because it's a systemic problem. And traditionally, it seems to be a problem every year. Emma, I don't know if you want to address that further in your visits, because I'm sure you've heard the same thing, in addition to the second part of Lisa's question.
Yeah, I think that currently there is an emergency MOA that allows for certain coverage for certain titles and so on and so forth, but that's exactly it. And the purpose of the emergency coverage document is to allow DOE and the schools to come up with a plan that's going to resolve for these staffing shortages that are happening. I too believe that you and Michael are doing everything you can to expedite, for lack of a better word, the bureaucracy that sometimes is involved with the paras getting through the hiring process. What I will say is I remind those of you that are seeing this to make sure that folks that service these students in some way, shape, or form have looked closely at the IEP supplementary aids and services section to determine that in fact the student requires a one-to-one individual para. It could possibly be that the IEP recommends a one-to-one group para, and that means they could potentially serve up to 3 students with similar needs. And there's a lot more information on that I can share with you folks. But sometimes we discovered that the people stop at the one-to-one recommendation piece and don't see that it doesn't say one-to-one individual, it says one-to-one group. And that may be permissible. So I do look forward to hearing from you off this meeting if you have any questions about the IEPs, and we may talk about it a little bit more as it relates to the special ed complaint process that's on the agenda.
Thank you, Emma.
Mary Jo, can you also talk about review who should be trained in the screening process, and how will teachers be paid for to do it?
I think Mary's probably still on the call, and there was a very robust timeline, which we chose not to go into because some of I don't know if the numbers were actually adhered to, but I do know that principals were to send teachers and I think it was 2 teachers and 2 paras for a training. And if you're finding it, that's again why I set up the mailbox. If people are not getting released or your principal is not sending folks, we really need to know that information so we can actually work on that for you, because the trainings are out there and they've been happening. I think they started in July, maybe even there were some trainings, or into August. So Mary, if there's anything further you want to add on those trainings, because I know that your teacher center is definitely heavily involved in that training process as well.
Can parents opt out of doing the screenings?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they would, if they provide written notice, I'm sure they can opt out of the screener. You mean the screeners that are done at the for the AIS piece?
Right.
Well, one thing I would like to comment on at this point is that some in the press have characterized these as assessments, implying that they are somehow as time-consuming and demanding as the state assessments that are typically administered in the spring. The screeners are very short assessments. When you're talking about the Acadian screeners for K-2, they're a few minutes apiece, very, very short. None of these screeners is a very long, takes an excessively long period of time to complete. So again, I think one of the things I would encourage you to do with families is to talk about the screener itself and what the purpose is, because the purpose really is to identify the child's learning gaps so that the school can help the child. And I think that it is not being used to judge the child, to place the child in a grade, to give the child a grade, to hold anybody accountable for anything other than finding out a way to meet the child's needs. And I think once families understand that, they will, most of them will be more than willing to have their child participate in the screener.
Okay, and a general question, will this recording or the PowerPoints be available and sent to members if they request it?
Yes, we actually, we could put the PowerPoint on our website. I mean, actually, Gary, if you don't mind, this just might be a good opportunity to bring up our website where at least we have the recovery documents. So our website, the UFT website, Students with Disabilities, we have a tab for this school year. Yep. Thank you, Gary. So you could see that 2021-22 school year, exactly. And you could see, and I also, like I said, I had put 3 of these links where you see here, it says academic recovery. There's the multi-language learners, the special ed, and the academic recovery. Yep, they're on, they were, those particular 3 were in the email. But we also, which I'm going to speak about, we'll look at the special ed recovery service agreement as well. So here, and we can post this on our website, or I have no problem if people want it sent to them, certainly email. And but I would say we post almost everything on the website so people can always go back and access that information. Thank you, Gary.
We have a question about case managers. Just what is a case manager and who are they? How are they chosen?
That's a perfect segue, Brad, for where I'm going. So Rhonda, you can bring our PowerPoint back up. So the case manager, and listen, this case manager role, we know plays out a little funky. I mentioned it in some town hall we had prior to this one, that sometimes there are schools that divvy up the IEPs, if you will, in order to make the workload manageable. But the fact is that the case manager is the person who is responsible to conduct the annual review meeting. Now, there are instances where a psychologist is required at a meeting, and that person would function and that therefore the psychologist would function as the case manager if it's a reevaluation or a triennial, if there's something being added to an IEP, then by default, when the psychologist is required, they are the case manager. But in regular circumstances, annual review, these are the times that it's important that special ed teachers who know those students are the case manager. Of course, if a student is gen ed only with speech or a gen ed only with PT, then the related service person would actually be the case manager. So this is in the SOPM. You could find more information about the case manager. And Rhonda, if you could bring up our PowerPoint where we can go over the responsibilities of the case manager, because again, as Michael mentioned, this is extra work to do these recovery plans. Okay, and even though the SIT team or the AIS team will be looking at all this data and compiling it, looking at the special ed priority categories, looking at the screener results, etc., and sharing that information with the case managers, the case manager is the person who's actually going to do the outreach to the parent and to document that in Css. So this slide here kind of speaks to that, of what's the data that the case manager would review. Okay, and making that outreach to the parent, which again, we want to make sure when we're reaching out to parents that it's a real conversation about their child and what their child's, what are you determining from that conversation with the parent that that student really needs? Because we want to make sure that we're looking at still at each student individually, not that we're offering, if you will, like a menu of we can give you this or we can give you that. I mean, that's a battle we deal with all the time in special ed with people trying to mass change IEPs. So this outreach is really important, and really want to hear again from the parents holistically, emotionally, academically, functioning, you know, whether it's ADLs or et cetera. What does the student need? Okay, and so this will be documented on the special ed recovery services. I use the term originally individual recovery plan, but it's referred to here. And I sent this email when you got this invite for this town hall that there was a webinar yesterday. There was one today, and there's one more tomorrow that people can participate in, and I strongly urge that you do. Those will be recorded. So if you can't make the dates that they're actually happening, which tomorrow would be the last one, we're going to put those also on our website. And again, I just want to stress this is like a fluid process. It's a really monitoring whatever special ed recovery that these students are offered. Is it working? Or, you know, so this has to be a fluid communication between the team and the case managers. So Rhonda, you can go to the next slide, please. So this is just some questions again for, you know, to kind of guide. It's not like you have to document all of the answers here, but just to guide the conversation, you know, with the parent or as you're actually reviewing the data. You know, we spoke a lot at our previous town halls about, you know, new needs that, you know, sometimes there is a new need that may have emerged given the circumstances that students are, you know, have been under for the past, you know, since March 2020. And again, this plan should really document specifically the level and the time that the students are getting the instruction or the related services. Okay, you can go to the next slide, Rhonda. So again, here we have the links where you can register. Okay, great. We have that one for tomorrow. The link is there. And again, we will make sure that these are on our website after people, after they're finished doing them, where we'll make sure that you have access, you know, through our website to listen to those. Okay, so I'm going to take a pause there and see, are there any other questions that we could take on? I mean, what I do want to say, I don't know if Rich is on. I know people have been kind of getting polls left and right, but you know, when a case manager has more than 30 students for which they function in that capacity, you know, there's a memorandum of agreement that after that, the case manager has to be someone else who works with that student on the IEP, because that's a lot of IEPs to be responsible for and to be the case manager for, and that folks will be paid up to 2 hours of per session or the applicable hourly rate if it happens to be you know, like a OT, for example, for each of those students. And of course, as always, we don't want any homegrown made up documents that some schools get very creative at making. You know, this document is going to be in Css, and that's where all the students' special ed data is housed. And you shouldn't be asked to do anything in addition to that. So Rich, I'm just going to pivot to you if there's anything more specifically about the agreement that you want to speak to.
No, I mean, you pretty much covered it. Case manager gets up to 2 hours of per session per student with an IEP. And the responsibilities are, you know, entering the information into Css, no extra paperwork, as you pointed out. meets with the teachers, contacts the parents, and it's just done within the first few weeks of school. And that's really it. There may be, actually, there's going to be a posting for it. It'll be a posted position. We're working with the DOE now to create it. And once we come to an agreement, we'll get it out to the schools.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, that's been a common question. When I set up the special ed recovery mailbox, I was kind of excited that people were eager to, to participate. And so those postings are definitely in the works as we speak, in fact, for both for the recovery services. Okay, so Emma, I'm going to have you go over if you will, the IEP process for this year, because we know last year there was a lot of different kind of guidance. And after you do that, I will certainly speak to the major pieces of what are not in effect this year and that were last year. So as far as IEP meeting guidance for this year, I'm going to have Emma speak about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Jo. So I'm gonna also quickly share the screen because I'd like folks to see where they can find the documents regarding IEPs. As Mary Jo said, there's a section for any guidance that's relevant for this school year. And we were very intentional in keeping last year's guidance really for point of reference, right? Because if your school is saying they could do certain things and they're referring to a 2020-21 school year, it sort of gives you the ability to have a conversation about how those documents really don't apply, because we're sharing with you the documents that currently apply in the 2021-22 school year, and it's up front and center. And when you go to this section in our DOE documents section, the last hyperlink, which unfortunately I can't click on expediently because it does make you log in through the info hub, is where you're going to find the updated reissued special ed meeting guidance for this year. And not to oversimplify, but I think things are complicated enough. Basically, it's very much the same as remote meetings were being held. It says that they are encouraging IEP meetings continue to be remote meetings. However, parents have the right this year to request an in-person meeting. What I am encouraging our members and chapter leaders is, if you do run into a parent who does not want a remote meeting, please do not hesitate to remind them that if they come into your school buildings for a meeting, they will have to show proof of vaccination. And we certainly wouldn't want to waste parents' time having them request an in-person meeting and then sending them away saying you can't come in because you don't have a vaccination. So that seems pretty straightforward, but it might not be. So make sure that that's stated, and they do have the right to that. In the guidance, when you look at it closely, and thank you, Brad, for putting the link in the chat, it shows that the remote options, we're really talking again about making sure you're using a modality that's been approved by your school in terms of having the meeting on Zoom or whatever, or Teams, whatever it is your school has chosen as the acceptable modality. And that's pretty much it in terms of IEPs. And just keep in mind that they continue to be encouraged to be remote, and parents can request them to be in person. I do want to quickly mention, because when you talk about IEP meetings, you talk about case managers and the roles and responsibilities that they have to do the paperwork related to meetings, right? Schedule the meetings, send the notification to meetings. It's wonderful that we have this MOA around special ed recovery, because that helps us cap the number of special ed case manager cases at 30. But that's neither here nor there, because we're still getting questions about paperwork, and excessive paperwork at that. So it's worth mentioning that we do have our Css Arbitration, which has been in place since 2010, and that is still part of our collective bargaining agreement. So If you do not have time for your paperwork related to IEP meetings, the Css Arbitration says that schools are supposed to give our members time to do their IEP meeting paperwork. And if for some reason you're just being told, do your meetings, do your paperwork, figure it out, you can always defer to the Css arbitration. And you can find that in our key links section. If you click on key links on the bottom, there's a section for contractual matters. And one of the items has to do with the Css arbitration. It's the second item, arbitration decision regarding time for Css. It's a leverage point for your working with your chapter leaders to work in consultation to get anyone who needs time to do their Css related work, the time that they need during the day to do so. Because of the changes in staffing that have been created and developed as a result of the vaccine mandate and certain folks having to go on leave, we obviously know that that's impacting staffing and it's impacting programming. I am not the one who handles collective bargaining issues. I handle compliance, but it is worth mentioning that in our last chapter leader update, if your chapter leaders did not share it with you, which is dated October 5th, there was an item regarding extension for filing reorganization grievances. Since I do not handle reorganization grievances, I'm just encouraging all of you that if you think you have a legitimate grievance regarding your new program, and you should consult with your chapter leader can consult with your district rep and figure out in a timely manner whether or not there's a legitimate reorganization grievance that you need to file. So unless I missed something, Mary Jo, I think that's it for this
No.
particular segment.
Yeah, that was great, Emma and Brad. I saw you also dropped in the chat that if you have an IEP meeting during your prep, you know, you are entitled to be compensated for that. So this is why we labeled this contractual issues. We want you to know where to find this information, because I always cringe when I'm visiting schools and people tell me that they're doing that and then they're not being compensated for it, either because they don't know or they don't know where to find the information. So, but that's why we're very diligent in keeping the website up to date and also redirecting people to it. So you have the information that you could share with your administrator when you're asked to do such things. I think, Emma, the only thing I would ask you to add, if you wanted to just say that there will be a little bit about that trauma-informed professional learning that will be coming down the pike shortly.
Yeah, there is certainly going to be an expectation that when our IEP teams sit down to discuss recommendations, that they're taking potential trauma into consideration. What kind of impact has trauma potentially had on the manifestation of our students' needs? So we can't really separate the student we're discussing from that trauma-informed evaluation. And I believe that there'll be more information forthcoming. I'm sure that our team will get that out to everyone when it's up and out. It is as a direct result of a lawsuit that parents brought. So it's not like we have much choice around it, but we certainly are in conversations to make it something that can be timely and that can be done efficiently, given all the other things that people have to do. So there's more to come on that. Thank you for reminding me of that, Mary Jo.
Thank you, Emma. Okay, so I think we can take a couple of more questions, Lisa and Brad, and then we can move on with the agenda. We're actually doing great on time. Anything related to IEP meetings or?
So could you talk about the collapsing the IEP meeting and the SCR?
Yeah, so there, sometimes, which many of you probably already know, that when a triennial and an annual are going to be, coming in close time to each other, instead of doing two separate meetings in one school year for a student, they collapse those into one meeting. And that's why I wanted to, even in my email that was sent to you about this town hall, I mentioned other people that may very well be involved in doing the case management aspect. So that's when those meetings get collapsed, is when there's either a reconvene or a triennial happening right around the same time that the annual would already be occurring. So instead of having 2 meetings, you put it into 1. Good question. Thank you.
And what happens if schools have not done any screening? Who should they contact?
Contact me, contact Mary Vaccaro, whether it's the screening or the training or anything. You know, we want you to definitely let us know, and we will get on top of that.
Okay, and just as general, can you talk about what should be used for the screenings once again? Because we're still getting that question.
What should be, you mean which screeners?
Mhm.
Mary
Okay.
Jo, I have that right in front of me, so I can
Okay.
I can actually read that.
Okay.
For K-2, the reading screening is Acadience. The math screening is Acadience, map growth, or for schools who are already using iReady Diagnostic, the iReady Diagnostic screener. For students in grade bands 3 to 8, in reading, it is map growth, iReady Diagnostic, again, for schools that are already using it. And in math, the same, map growth and iReady Diagnostic for schools that are already using it. The answer is for grades 9 to 12. Reading is map growth. There are also map growth assessments or screeners for math, which includes Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Geometry, as well as general math through grades 12. Schools may apply for an exception to use a different screener if it meets the criteria of being both valid and reliable, and there is the ability to share the data with Central and include it in each district's data set. For students with disabilities that participate in alternate assessment, the screener will be the tests or the assessments that are typically used in District 75, namely Sandy Fast or WebAbles. I think that pretty much covers the.
Thank you. Yes, and again, I think that is comprised, that information in the overall recovery document. When I had Gary bring up where on the website, you go under again, this school year's tab, and you'll see the recovery document. I believe that might be outlined in there. If not, and people need that written information again, anything you need, whether it's, you know, written information that you can't find, because looking for anything on the DOE website is a challenge. That's all I can say. And a lot of times stuff is not housed in what would seem like the place you would find it. So you never know where you're going to find it or if you're going to find it at all. So definitely email us if you have any questions, or if you just have a concern about what's being used or not being used at your school.
Mary Jo, can I jump in a second?
Of course.
I took a glimpse at the questions, and there are a couple of them regarding the case manager responsibilities for IEP teachers as it relates to special ed recovery. So it might be worth to mention it again. Case manager duties have been defined in the standard operating procedure manual, right? And that's the guide, what we kind of use to identify folks taking on the special ed recovery. So if you're having an annual review, generally, the special ed teacher is the case manager. If you've got an initial, the centrally funded IEP teacher is the case manager. So in the case of initials, it could happen that the IEP teacher, the centrally funded IEP teacher, would be the case manager for the special ed recovery. And similarly, if we collapse an annual review with a 3-year review or a full committee or a reeval, because generally the case manager for those is the psychologist, then in those cases, the psychologist might be the case manager for the special ed recovery. And that's really the way you align how this should be decided. And of course, then you're adding on the layers of the 30 maximum, and everybody gets paid, which is a good thing. So.
Thank you, Emma. So there are things that I just want to mention that are no longer in effect, because there was, Emma mentioned central funded IEP teacher, and I start to think, there was a little bit difference of what they did last year temporarily, but that agreement, they're going back to their original, how the posting and the guidance was written. But Gary, if you would bring up on our website the 2020-21. So last school year, we had a lot. That's why, as Emma said, we made the website like that. So what was in effect last year, which this is what was last year. Okay, so essentially there's the pad, for example, is no longer in effect. You could see there, if you scroll down, you'll see the pad and the RAD and all of that stuff, and the central funded IEP teacher. There was also that state ed guidance that, because of safety, that's ICT teachers that came straight from the state could be split, and the groups of students would be split, and the teachers would go back and forth between those classrooms. So those are the primary ones that I really wanted you to be aware of. No more pad, no more varied role of the IEP teacher, the central funded. It's as the guidance stands, which again is on our website. And that flexibility with the ICT is a big one. And that should not be happening. Again, I recognize there was an issue this week, and there was a temporary MOA, and things are really chaotic right now. I'm hoping that they're settling down and that schools will know, at least in another week, like a week from today, what kind of staffing they actually have. But it's just important to note that this is everything that was last year. And then Gary, I think when you go back to the main area, you could see what's in effect for this school year. And just really important to look at our menu there. I mean, we've got, a really great menu of, if you want more information about ICT, the models or the sets, et cetera, everything is here, organized really, really well on the website.
Gary, could you go back to the last year, 2021, please? And now click on special ed in blended and remote learning environments. Not working. Oh, there we go. So these are all the documents that we have confirmed with the DOE that they are no longer in effect for the current school year. So if there are practices in your school that are relying on any of this guidance, they should not be happening. This section, the 2021, that is no longer in effect, will be pulled down later on in this month. Right now, we're leaving it so that you know what is not in effect, and you can bring that to the attention of your administration if it's happening.
Thank you, Liz. Yep, we'll leave that there a little longer. Okay, so I'm gonna now have Debbie go into her part of the presentation, which is so important, really, so people understand. Emma mentioned the Css arbitration or reorg grievances, and for any of these MOAs, these emergency MOAs, I will say, if it's anything related to getting paid or that somebody hasn't gotten paid for what they were supposed to, that will still go through the grievance process. But we're going to have Debbie. And I think, Rhonda, you have a PowerPoint that Debbie sent us as well. So Debbie, you could just let us know if you want us to bring that up right now.
Please put the PowerPoint up. That would be great.
Perfect.
So yes, everyone got a clear background of some of the grievances that could be filed, special ed complaints. But we also negotiated back in 2014, originally what was known as the paperwork reduction process. And then we expanded on the success of resolving issues through that paperwork process. And now it's known as the, could you go back to the first? Yeah, leave this here. It then expanded in 2018 to what we now know as the operational issue process. And so we used this exclusively last year when grievances were down and suspended, but this year the grievance process is fully open. And that is why you can still file step one grievances and reorg grievances and do all those resolutions through the regular grievance process. But you have an opportunity also to resolve issues through this process. And so what is an operational issue? Well, basically an operational issue is anything that violates the system-wide standards and any of the new MOAs covered under this school year. And I'm going to go through those really quickly so we could go to the next slide. So most people know about the paperwork standards. There were 5 of them. That was what started this all in 2014. And they were generally about the reduction of excessive paperwork, redundant, duplicative, unnecessary paperwork. It covers a lot of the special ed paperwork issues involving duplication of Css documents into different areas. And so we've always had the paperwork reduction process, 5 standards. And if you are in a school where you feel that the work that you're being asked to do is, and my favorite one, paperwork standard 1, redundant, duplicative, unnecessary, or unreasonable, you speak to your chapter leader. Your chapter leader resolves the issues on behalf of the chapter. In 2018, we expanded from paperwork to operational. And so we added standards around curriculum, which Mary spoke about. Everyone should be provided a curriculum. The professional development committee at your school, which has been joined with the other committees that came out a few years ago. Every single school should have a professional development committee. So there's a standard on that. We included basic instructional supplies, things that you need to do the work that you need to do for your students. And that is an operational issue if your principal has not provided you with the basic instructional supplies that you need to do your job. We also added two standards involving our functional chapters. So one of them is workload, and that covers U of T represented employees who are not classroom teachers or paraprofessionals. Are they is the guidance counselor in your school being provided, being asked to do too much work or work that's not part of their job typically? Then we also have this one, which is very popular at the moment, space. It's also for functional chapters. The DOE is committed with us in 2018 that every functional chapter that works with our most neediest students have the proper space. Our speech teachers, our OTs, PTs, psychologists, guidance counselors, so on. They should not be working in a stairwell, in the back of an auditorium, in a working bathroom. And so space is very important to do that job. And now we've added the extra caveat of making sure that it's 3-foot distancing and safe space to work with students in this COVID, post-COVID or COVID area that we're in. So those were the regular paperwork and new operational standards that were created in 2018. And then of course we have new agreements that everybody's been busy finalizing for the last 2 months. And so I'm gonna name those for you. You'll be able to find those on the website. I just wanted to mention that safety is also an operational process. It's a separate process, and we'll have documents on the website for that. Your chapter leaders, if you're a chapter leader, will be getting training on this and will be provided with more information. So now let's go to the next slide. These are all the new agreements so far as of today that go through the operational process. As Mary Jo said, any of these documents that involve non-payment of money go through the regular salary grievance process. But any operational issue where there's a violation of one of these agreements, they're not following the agreement correctly, that could be filed as an operational issue. The first one is the operational issue process, which changed the timelines. So schools and chapter leaders and principals can raise an issue at the school. And once that issue is raised, they have 5 days, and we'll go into more of the process, 5 days at the district level and the central level committee. We have the pivot to remote agreement that came out in early September, and that's the agreement that guides how every teacher had to create a digital classroom, and you're getting paid that stipend at the end of this month. And it also outlined how you use this digital classroom in emergency situations, for an emergency closure, a partial classroom closure, a snow day, election day, and so on. And that agreement talks about when you use this digital classroom and how you get paid if you're asked to provide asynchronous instruction for a partial closure or office hours. We also have an instructional lunch agreement, which allows teachers who, unlike last year where you had instructional lunch and we had a 5.5-hour day, because we were trying to keep students and teachers and paras and everyone in the building as little as possible. People had instructional lunch last year as part of their regular teaching periods. This year, if you have an instructional lunch as part of your regular teaching program, you will get paid a coverage a day for every single period. And that's being programmed into your schedule. And so that is one of the agreements that we came up with to deal with schools that maybe couldn't socially distance and have students in the cafeteria or in large spaces, and they chose in some instances to keep the students in the classroom. Those teachers will get paid for that. You have the medically necessary instruction or home instruction agreement, which is talking about how students who have traditionally been in home instruction with medically necessary instruction, these are students who can get one-to-one in-person instruction still, or one-to-one in-person instruction, and it also covers small group instruction by our ALC teachers. We also have what you've been focused on a lot here, which is the special ed recovery services. This agreement you could look at. This provides for case managers up to 2 hours per child for completing the services and the notices in Css. And so if there's any violations, not of not getting paid, but if they're not doing it properly, as Emma talked about earlier, like who is potentially the case manager, an operational issue can be filed for those people through your chapter leader. We have a redeployment agreement. If you have people in your school that are not being properly redeployed and following that agreement, that's an operational issue. And we have the emergency classroom coverage, which is a 1 week agreement. We have to decide whether that's going to be renewed for next week, but that also covers what many of you are dealing with in your schools, which is how are people dealing with the lack of the teachers in the classroom and who's covering them and what's the situations where people get paid for that and so on. So we have all these new agreements. Those go through this operational process. We can do the next one. So how does this work in your school? If you're not familiar with it, some of you who are chapter leaders will get a refresher on this, but for the teachers who are on the call and other functional chapters, what happens is that if there's an issue in the school, there's a way to resolve it at the school level. The goal is to resolve these issues as quickly and as efficiently as possible. We don't want them dragged on. So normally what the chapter leader will do, if they are aware of the issue, is they bring it up with the principal, and they could do that in a one-on-one meeting. They could do it through their consultation committee. They could send an email. And then they fill out an online form to us. Just so you know, we have records of the issues that are in your school, and we are tracking, systemic issues citywide. And Michael is aware of what's going on around the city based on issues that are being resolved at the school level or reported at least. So they have 5 school days once the issue is raised to resolve it. That's the principal and the chapter leader. You could go to the next slide. So what happens? What does your chapter leader do? When they meet with the principal, they are going to want to resolve this. They're going to tell them what the issue is, what the violation is. They're going to have a clear resolution that is being requested. And if it's something that's affecting you, you should be aware of what's going on in your school. They're going to provide all the relevant supporting documentation. They're completing the online form. That gives us the data in our system. And that form goes to the district rep. It comes to my office. And we have a record of all the issues that are being reported. Again, after 5 days, your chapter leader either will have it resolved, and you all should know about the resolution immediately in the school, and they tell the district rep. If it's not resolved, the issue can be escalated to the district level. Next slide. So, we could skip this. This is how the chapter leader files it. They go online. All right, so the district level, after the chapter leaders inform the DR that the issue was either resolved or not, if it wasn't resolved, the DR is going to escalate it to the superintendent. And it's a very transparent escalation. Everyone is on the email. So there is no dispute about what the issue is. Your district rep is going to email the superintendent. They're going to CC your chapter leader, the principal, the borough rep, everyone on the everyone who's on the central committee from the UFT, and everyone who's on a central committee from the DOE. They're going to be on that email immediately, where the district rep is going to say, this is the issue, and this was not resolved at the school level by the principal. And then that superintendent and district rep have 5 school days to resolve it. I will tell you that this email is a lot of fun. It prompts resolutions many times very quickly because principals thought that they had more time. But we do get a lot of resolutions. We do see things resolved at a lower level quicker than we had in the past. And it's a process that, you know, I have a lot of fun with that. Everybody who's on the panel knows it. And it gets your issue out there quickly with the goal, again, of resolving as quickly as possible. If for some reason, though, the issue is not resolved at the school level within 5 days, there is another level, and it can come to the central committee. Let's go to the next slide. Now, that's the committee that I'm on with Leroy Barr and Rich Mantel and David Campbell and people from the central DOE. And right now, the new agreement says that we meet every week if there's a new issue to be raised. We've been meeting weekly for the last few weeks. We don't have any new issues at the central level. It seems that anything that's been filed have been able to be resolved at the school level. We only have a few that have been escalated to the district level. But at this level, we take up the issue and we try to find out what happened. Why didn't the principal and the chapter leader, why were they unable to resolve it at the school? What happened with the superintendent and district rep? Why didn't they resolve it when they should have? And then we come up with the resolution. It has to be implemented by the superintendent. We notify everyone. And we typically get most operational issues done at this level. Very few go to the president and the chancellor. Last year, I think there were 2. But if for some reason, even at the central level, we can't agree on a resolution, then it will go to Michael and the chancellor or their designees to resolve. And so the last slide just shows you kind of, you could go to the next, just this escalation. So we start at the school, district, central. We really don't want anything coming to central. We want everything being resolved at the school or district level. But if it does come to us, we want it resolved quickly. So that is why you'll see 5 days, 5 days, and us, we're meeting every week. So that's a general overview of the operational process and you know, the timelines for this year and the issues that you can raise if you see any issues or violations with any of those agreements. So Mary Jo, I don't know how you want to take questions on this or anything else. I'm here.
Great, thank you, Debbie. Yeah, it's been a whirlwind with many emergency MOAs. So Debbie certainly has enough work going on there. And she's really good at giving these presentations in districts and, at chapter leader meetings and, with chapter. So it's, it definitely, I don't know, they may want a copy of that.
Yeah, we
PowerPoint
can
as well,
get that. This PowerPoint was geared to chapter leaders. We're going to be doing this at the chapter leader training, but when Mary Jo asked me to do something with you to do an overview, I'm like, let me just use this. And again, remember, nobody should have to be in a school with contractual violations. We have enough to do, right? And so you have a grievance process, which works, but we also have this other process that we were able to negotiate for certain issues. And if you're not sure whether there's a violation, speak to your chapter leader, speak to the district rep. People can contact me as well. What our goal is to make sure that nobody's working in a school with any violations. Nobody should be working in a school where they're not able to speak up. And part of the operational process really empowers schools to, as a community together, raise the issue through the chapter leader and resolve it. It's a school community kind of resolution process. It's not an individual one, as the grievance process is. And again, if you're not sure whether there's a paperwork violation, whether there's violations of these other things, speak to your chapter leader. They will reach out to the district rep or me, and we can make sure that, what's happening in your school is within the contractual agreement or not. And if it's not, let's take care of it quickly.
And I think, Debbie, you make a good point, which is a good transition to Emma wrapping up with the special ed complaint process, because it's always best when something could be resolved at the school level via consultation or, through the chapter leader, as you said. And, if obviously sometimes that doesn't happen, and that's why these other mechanisms or levels, if you will, are in place. Because we know that not everything's going to be resolved, but similarly, and I'll let Emma wrap up with the special ed complaint, is that's always a goal, to try to educate people about the process, whether it's this operational process, we use the SOPM, and really trying to educate people where you can find the information in order to try to resolve at a school level.
Right, before Emma goes, people just don't know what to do. Usually people are in a school and they have a gut feeling something's not right. I don't think this should be.
Should I be doing this?
Right? Should I be doing this? And so what we want our members to know is that if you are not sure, there may be a process for you to resolve it. Don't just live with it silently in pain, let's find out what's going on. Okay, I'll let Emma go.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, Debbie. I was sitting here patiently listening to you, and one thing's clear. Mary Jo's right. Debbie knows what she's talking about. So it's always very informational when you speak, and it's hard to follow you. But that being said, this is my spiel, so it's not a new spiel. Most folks that have heard me speak before, have heard Kerry speak, know that we have an alternative way for members to advocate for their students and for themselves by default. When our students don't get what they need, then that means we can't do our job. So when we talk about special ed complaints, even though it has nothing to do with the collective bargaining issues or the contract or your working conditions, it still has a byproduct effect. And thank you, Gary, for bringing that up. Our special ed complaint form is on our UFT webpage, as is everything else. It's a one pager. Special ed complaints, because they have nothing to do with your collective bargaining rights or your working conditions, and are all about the students' mandates, their IEPs, their rights under city, state, and federal regulations, means that chapter leaders cannot file special ed complaints for another member, for a group of students they don't service. The folks that have to file this complaint have to be folks that service the students in some way, shape, or form. They have to be responsible for some implementation responsibility of the student or the class that they're letting us know about. The complaint form is confidential. That means that this is unlike a state complaint, which, by the way, anyone can file. You can go to the state and say, hey, the kids in my school's IEPs are being violated, and it wouldn't be confidential. You can go to the state and the state would come in and investigate an issue. But most of the time, our members do not want to confront these issues for their own very important reasons. That's why this process is confidential. Okay, I am the only person who sees the complaint for Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Staten Island schools and students. And Kerry Yeffet is the only person who sees them for the Bronx, Queens, and District 75. So they are confidential. We do need to know who we're talking to. We do need to be able to establish the way in which you service the affected students. And at that point, once we get the complaint, we have a conversation with you usually, and we get the student specifics from you after the fact. I want to remind folks, you should not be providing student-specific information anywhere on this form until you speak to us, and then we will likely request it. 9 out of 10 times, we're going to take it from you over the phone. Similarly, just because we've seen a rash of this lately, no one on this call should be sharing names, ID numbers, IEP-related documents with anyone at the UFT. Okay? We have seen members, because they're navigating other mechanisms at the UFT, share student-specific IEP-related information with UFT representatives. That is not permissible. That can get you into big trouble. The only reason that myself and Kerry are allowed is because we are UFT liaisons to the Department of Education, specifically tasked with this work around compliance. Okay, so the complaint form's pretty straightforward, a one-pager. As I said, it's confidential. Your identity won't be shared with anyone. I'm the only one who knows for my schools. Carrie's the only one who knows for her schools. Do not share student specifics. Do not wait too long to file these. Okay, we see a rash of these come in at the end of the year. Oh, I'm leaving the school, so I'm letting you know this was going on. This should be a proactive process. The whole purpose of this process is to fix and resolve the matter on behalf of our students. If we get a complaint in June, we cannot fix or resolve the matter for students who went the whole entire year without a particular service, without a particular level of support. We want you to put your parent hat on to decide, is it time for me to file this complaint? Have I tried to resolve it at the school level? Have I waited a reasonable amount of time for a resolution and not seen a resolution? And put your parent hat on. If it was my child, would I wait 6 months for a resolution? The answer is no. Okay, so this process is really, and what we often talk about with this process is, there's no reason why any one person who services these students in some way, shape, or form needs to file these. Sometimes there are school-wide issues going on in every grade. This should be an engagement opportunity for your school community. All of you should rally together, and if you can't resolve it at the school level, all of you that have kids that aren't getting their services should be filing these. There's safety in numbers, and the more information we have, the more successful we will be at resolving these issues and helping our students get the services that they need.